Good afternoon and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Corinne Elmore.
And my name is Jocelyn Shu. And we are the 2025 Directors of Diversity and Engagement here at the Institute of Politics.
Welcome to the Fall 2025 Our Narrative Showcase. A few important announcements before the start of our program. Please take notes of the exit doors located on the JFK Street side and the Park side of the forum, and in case of emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones.
Since its inception in 2022, the Institute of Politics has hosted the Our Narratives Showcase to highlight the inspiring stories of our community. It has been an opportunity for students to share how their experiences have shaped their journeys into public service on the largest political stage on campus, the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. It is more important than ever to protect and preserve spaces that uplift student voices and highlight the diverse narratives that each of us brings to this space. Today, you will hear from 5 powerful speakers from a variety of diverse backgrounds and perspectives.
These are stories of unique journeys to public service and how they intersect with many of the pressing issues of today. In the words of Audre Lorde, your silence will not protect you. So, as our students rise to this occasion, we ask that you listen and learn from their narratives with an open mind and an open heart.
Before we begin, we want to preface that the views of our speakers do not reflect the views of the Institute of Politics or of any other speaker. Also, a content warning. This showcase will involve difficult topics of addiction, violence, and other themes that may be triggering for some.
We want to thank all of our amazing speakers for their commitment to our narratives. Thank you for all your hard work and for trusting us with your stories. We are so proud. And we are so excited for all of you to experience their narratives.
And without further ado, introducing our first speaker from the class of 2029, she will be presenting her speech, Nightmares, From Addiction to Advocacy. Please welcome to the stage, Allison McGourty.
For most kids, their nightmares consist of monsters under the bed or ghosts in the closet, but these are purely fictional. My nightmares centered around a dark figure illuminated against the white curtain that served as my bedroom door. There was no lock, no barrier, just a figure swaying mere feet away. All I could do was hold my brother, both of us shaking with fear, trying to squeeze our eyes shut and fall asleep, because scarier than any monster was my father. My father's opioid addiction was my family's monster. Events like this weren't uncommon, with my brother and I navigating around our house, tiptoeing around my father, unconscious on our living room sofa, or nodding off in the hall. But my father is one of the most charismatic people you will ever meet. He could make anyone laugh, like when we were filling out financial aid, and he kept yelling about how we needed to call up Mr. Mark Board of the College Board for help. Without a college education, he was able to get a finance job just because of his way with words. However, when he was laid off, it took over. His addiction matched the seasons of the year. In the winter, he was sober. In the spring, he'd try to prevent a relapse. In the summer, he'd succumb to his addiction. And in the fall, he'd be back in rehab. With my mother working multiple jobs as a sole provider, I had to step up for my brother's sake. I would cook him dinner, help him with homework, and most importantly, help him fall asleep at night while my incapacitated father was in the next room. It didn't stop there. I was my father's personal therapist. We would take long car rides, always centered around the same topic, my mother. He would cry to me, claiming that my mother never loved him, that she cheated on him, and how this made him want to swim out into the ocean and die. But then I matured. I learned that none of this was true, and going into my preteens, I started getting angry, arguing back during these rants. This retaliation changed something. My father started telling me he didn't love me anymore, and nitpicking every part of me, from my appearance to my personality. A resentment grew inside me, mainly towards my dad, but also my family as a whole. I had spent all this time helping others, but no one was there to help me. These feelings didn't change until I was 11, when my sister was born. Once again, my father was back in rehab, so I had to step up. In my free time, I read through What to Expect When You're Expecting and watched every video online about ways to entertain a baby. When my sister was born, I cut the umbilical cord. I was excited for our new life, just my mother, my brother, my sister, and I. But then my dad came back. He wanted to step up, he wanted to be there for her. And my resentment came back as well. Because how could he be there for her, but not for me? But then he relapsed. Again and again. My resentment vanished. I realized my sister was someone I needed to protect, just like I had with my brother. But this time, something was different. I wasn't scared anymore. Rather than viewing this as a responsibility, it was a gift. I was able to give her the childhood I never had. Dinners in her favorite green frog bowl, bath times where I washed her hair without getting soap in her eyes, and bedtimes filled with stories and songs. I love this feeling, this ability to give someone a better life than I had. She doesn't have to worry about taking care of her siblings or what state her dad would be in when she gets home from school. This satisfaction made me realize my love for public service. So in high school, I dove into this. I started advocating for women's rights at the Massachusetts State House and really learned just how one person could make a difference. I researched the I Am bill, which proposed free and accessible menstrual products to all public schools, prisons, and homeless shelters. With a group of girls, I joined Mass Now and worked with local groups like Free Period. I attended advocacy days where I got to sit down with senators and explain to them why this bill was important. I was surrounded by other women who loved making change. When I went to the voting session for this bill, I heard senators give speeches about how they were in full support of it because of the high school students who had taken the time to sit down and explain the importance to them. This was just one bill at the state level, but I realized if I kept making change, I could keep working hard. So at the next advocacy day, I started supporting other bills. Ones that allowed parents to use campaign funds to cover childcare, one that increased inclusivity in health classes, and other menstrual product bills. The nightmarish thoughts still replay again and again in my head. But they motivate me to make change. Images of my father nodding off or my brother shaking with fear empower me to make sure that no child ever has to experience that, but also to help the children and adults that do. Addiction has led to mental health issues, financial burdens, and a sense of hopelessness in my family. But being referenced as the reason as to why a bill passed made me realize I was not hopeless. Public service is a way to better the lives of so many others. My story has shown me the horrors of addiction, but also how advocacy and legislation can combat these challenges. I stand before you as a lifelong older sister who is committed to public service because all children's nightmares should be fictional. And if I can do anything to make that happen, I will. Thank you. That's my hearing.
Thank you so much, Allison, for your bravery, your perseverance, and for trusting us with your story. Our next speaker is Stephen Behun, class of 2028, presenting From Coal Mines to Cambridge, Fighting the Fading American Dream in Rural America. Please welcome Stephen.
Leave and don't look back. That was the first thing many people said to me when they found out I was accepted to Harvard. You have a chance to get somewhere with that degree, and it's not going to happen here. The fact of the matter is, though, I'm not ready to leave yet. My roots are in northeastern Pennsylvania, and they run deep. When my great-great-grandparents came through the port of Philadelphia in the late 1800s, rural Pennsylvania was a land of opportunity. Steel mills were springing up across the state, and rich veins of anthracite, also known as hard coal, were found in abundance in the Northeast. My great-grandfather, Leonard Pinckey, ran away from life as a breaker boy at the age of 15, lying about his age and joining the U.S. Army to fight in the First World War. His first day of combat was his 16th birthday. He came back from the war to work odd jobs throughout the Depression, re-enlisted in the Navy in World War II, and finally settled down as a dynamite salesman. On that salary, he was able to send all 4 of his sons to college, an opportunity he had never been afforded as a child. The coal region was thriving, and he thrived too. He had plenty of opportunities to relocate, sure, but he never did. His family was in the coal region, and that's where he stayed. In fact, throughout my family's history, we've had plenty of opportunities to leave, but one thing or another has always kept us coming back. One of Leonard's sons, my grandfather, George Pinckey, he served time out west fighting forest fires, in Maine as a college student, and overseas in the military, but he always found his way back to Pennsylvania. He would often say that if he had an autobiography, he would title it, "I Had It Good and I Knew It." His measurement for success? A week-long trip to Disney World. He knew that any family that could afford to take an entire week off of work and travel to a place dedicated solely to entertainment and relaxation was living the American dream. His blue-collar job at Bethlehem Steel and my grandfather's teaching position at the local high school were able to afford that dream. He saw the coal boom die off, and he was one of the last men inside the steel before it closed permanently in the 90s. Although my time with him was short, he and the stories about him that persist have helped to shape my respect for labor movements and my pride in where I come from. Through him, I learned about my roots and why my family has never left the coal region. We're proud of our heritage, sure, but the coal region was also one of the places to be for low and middle income Americans throughout the 1900s, especially as unions guaranteed better working hours, better wages, and safer working conditions. Being a coal cracker, as we're known for our mining roots, is a badge of honor, and not one I would soon abandon, regardless of the circumstances. Unfortunately, the current circumstances are not ideal. Rural Pennsylvania is no longer the beating heart of America that it once was. Coal might keep the lights on, but only as long as something else is paying the electric bill. The coal mines sit filled in, forgotten, converted into museums. The remains of Bethlehem Steel are hollowed out, rusting and silent. But the people of the coal region, they still have heart. My father was a youth wrestling coach and spent time advocating for local Catholic churches, hubs of community and service, even as local church administrators were trying to close them down. My mother is a youth swim coach, contributes to the weekly local paper, and was a former candidate for school board. They understood what it meant not just to be, successful members in their own right, but to be successful members of a community. Numerous other parents and citizens find ways to give back, to keep that community and the American dream within it alive. What's the one thing they have in common? Good paying jobs that afford them the ability to give back, to be those pillars of the community. There are fewer and fewer of those available every year. When my grandfather worked at the steel, there were buses and carpools aplenty, bringing down coal crackers by the bucket load to Bethlehem. When my father worked at Cartech, a similar distance from my home as the steel was, he was one of just a handful of people from the region employed there. So they say to us, get out. Do better than we have, or at least maintain a way of life that is getting harder and harder to sustain where we're at. 100, 50, even 25 years ago, the coal region was a place of opportunity, a place where you had a real shot at living the American dream. Now, though, just a place where more and more kids are trying to leave, get somewhere else to live their dreams. Today, it feels like rural Americans are treated like a statistic, a block to be courted every 2 or 4 years. We're thrown a bone every now and again, sure, but it seems there are very few people who actually understand the issues we face and are in a position to do something about it. Take, for example, a conversation I recently had with a longtime Pennsylvania politician. Their Tamaqua story, as they called it, was about how you could drive through my town just to get somewhere else. Conversation didn't last very long after that. You know, I've shared a lot of stories today, and I'll be honest, it was hard deciding which ones. My ancestors lived full lives, and they lived them well. I asked, but unfortunately there's not time to tell you guys about when my grandfather and uncle, who's here today, almost got arrested by the Secret Service for sightseeing. There's also the time that a half-naked teenager came up to my mom's house telling my grandparents, who were house-sitting at the time because her family was at Disney World, that they needed to call 911. He had been hunting in the woods nearby and had come across an injured hiker. He had given the shirt off of his back to make sure that that man did not go into shock while he went for help. That half-naked teenager was my father. And man, I wish I had been there to see the look on my great-grandparents' faces when my mom reintroduced him as her fiancé almost a decade later. I guarantee that if you walk into a restaurant in my hometown, you'll find a dozen kind-hearted, hardworking people with crazy, unique stories just like the ones I've shared today. But just like the stories that you'll hear when you're in line for a blini at St. Joe's Summerfest, or you're walking around with your lemonade and your pretzel at Hometown Farmers Market, the issues facing rural Americans today are unique and numerous and require a lot of effort to address. It was the blood, the sweat, and the tears of my ancestors, of the coal miners, the steel workers, the farmers, other rural Americans, and countless other communities that turned this country into the industrial superpower it was and the global superpower it is today. The descendants of those men and women deserve better. My friends, my neighbors, my region deserves better. And we have a lot to give in return. We do not need charity, but we do deserve an equal shot to say that we had it good and knew it where we're at, not just in cities and factories hours away from home. Coal might not keep the lights on anymore, but that doesn't mean that they should be shut off for good. And that's why I chose public service. At the Harvard Undergraduate Rural League and beyond, I am here to learn how to better advocate for my hometown at the state and national level. Whether it's the diversification of rural economies, investments in clean energy, or one of 100 other potential solutions to the wide variety of issues plaguing rural Americans today, I will continue to take pride in my legacy as a coal cracker and keep fighting. I will continue to fight to make sure that Tamaqua, Nesquehoning, Coaldale, and the countless other rural communities throughout the country that are struggling will continue to be places of opportunity, not just be remembered as such. I may have left the coal region momentarily, and I'm certainly enjoying my time here at Harvard, but I am sure as hell going back. I'm going to make sure future generations can as well. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Stephen, for sharing your family history and what always brings you back. Our next speaker is from the class of 2027, Mariia Hnatiuk. presenting The Fight Isn't Over, a story of surviving the war beyond headlines. Please give her a warm welcome.
Nine seconds. 9 seconds is how long it took for the launched missile to reach the town next to mine. I clung to my sense of hearing as the only source of information and was silently watching from the balcony, wondering when my family is going to be the next target. Only now there were no planes in Ukraine, and the sky was the bloody shade of red, unlike anything I've ever seen before. I was a silent spectator of a war that was unveiling right in front of my eyes. My parents worked endlessly, trying to raise 2 kids by themselves. I knew I had to work hard, so I sought opportunities and studied for hours, but it wasn't enough. I applied for countless scholarships and study abroad programs, receiving rejection letters time and time again. Until finally, I was awarded a full scholarship from the European Union. So I left home at 16 to study in Tbilisi, Georgia on IB diploma program. My life and my future finally had some clarity, but not for long. After the winter break, the school has made a decision to keep the classes online with the new outbreak of COVID. But as the whispers of war became more frequent and diplomats began leaving the country, they worried for my safety. So they booked me a flight, but I wasn't ready to go. I couldn't leave my home, my family, my country, so I stayed. February 24, 2022. I wake up for my typical online class and join Zoom. My classmates immediately start asking me questions, but I didn't check the news yet. I was ignorant to the fact that the war was here. I ran to my parents' room with a shaking voice and the words, "It started." They didn't react. But the fear in their eyes was so much louder than words. Between looking at the words in my textbook and the smoke in the distance, I had hope. It's all a mistake. By the end of the week, everything will come back to normal, I told myself. But the next day, electricity, water, internet disappeared one by one. Holding my sister's hand, I focused on the flickering light of the candle in the corner of the room, the only source of warmth we had in the house. And as the darkness was drifting us into sleep, the trembling windows and piercing cold had us awake for hours. On the 7th day, half of our village had been destroyed, with our neighbors' houses burning and tanks driving just outside of the window. "You have to leave now if you want your kids to survive," I heard our neighbor tell my dad. So we grabbed our dog, a few pieces of clothing, and got into the car to drive to the capital, Kyiv. Passing military vehicles and dozens of soldiers, my eyes welled up with tears. I realized I might never see my home again. The next day, my mom and dad came back to rescue our 3 cats that we had to leave in a rush. They knew there wouldn't be any signal in the war zone, so my sister and I waited in silence, trying to avoid all the what-ifs. As we were told later, they left our house just 2 hours before it was destroyed by Russian rockets. We were lucky. Bucha was now the headline of every major article. Shot, raped, buried, mutilated, tortured. The streets that were once filled with my friends' laughter were now nothing but ruins. I stayed for one night in a small apartment in Kyiv, and the next day, I started my journey back to Tbilisi. The trip that used to be just 2 hours long turned into 10 days. I traveled through 5 countries in a foreign car with unfamiliar people, and yet all I could think about was the survivor's guilt as I left my family amidst rockets and air raids. I hated myself for leaving. A month later, our village was finally deoccupied. And although my parents checked the news every single day, one of those days, they called me with their voices shaking. As I click the play button of the video they send, the ground falls out from beneath my feet. I see a place where my house once stood, with the shattered remains of a home that my parents spent 11 years building with their own hands. All their dreams gone. And a lifeless body next to the cellar of our neighbor who warned us but chose to stay in his home for a little longer. My hometown was a small village of 2,000 people on the outskirts of the capital. And while I thought I was ready to see it all, as the images have never left my mind, nothing prepared me for seeing my childhood home shattered into pieces. We had a total of 9 rockets on our territory. 9 seconds, 9 rockets. 9 is the number that makes my heart freeze every single time. As I crossed the ocean to continue my education here at Harvard, I started a new fight. A fight to make my country heard and seen through every interaction I have and every conference I attend. A fight to discover my strengths so that I could use them to rebuild my home. A fight to be here with a purpose bigger than myself. As a result, I co-founded Harvard Undergraduate Ukraine Solidarity Group, the first Ukrainian organization on Harvard campus, to fundraise, share my culture, and raise awareness about the war together with my friends. I mentor college applicants with Ukraine Global Scholars, an organization that was always there for me when I needed it most. And I teach English to kids in Guatemala so that I can be the hope that someone once was for me. Whether I work with veterans or children in Ukraine or abroad, I am forever guided by the values my country instilled in me. You don't always choose to be a part of a war, but you are in control of what happens next. Because soldiers are not only found on battlefields. Each and every one of you is a fighter. So choose your fight and help those who need it most. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariia, for your vulnerability and for reminding us what it all means to be a fighter. Our next speaker is from the class of 2029, presenting Food, Friends, and Faith, Creating Space at Every Table. Please welcome Farhaan Siddiqui.
Let's go, Farhaan!
Have you ever been to an open house? No, I'm not talking about the open house that you sell your home in. I'm talking a real open house where friends and family come together and share laughter, community, and food. I'm talking about the open house where your friend's friend who you barely know brings their neighbor. And that neighbor brings their Uber driver, who brings their whole family. Now that's a real open house. And I know many of you have not experienced this situation before. Who am I kidding? Probably no one in this room has experienced this particular situation before. Now, my story starts at my family's Eid table. My parents inviting family friends of every faith, and that's when a simple meal turns into a life story, that belonging is something that we share. And the fact that, yes, our open houses were chaotic and crazy, like the Uber driver bringing their whole family, but honestly, that's the best part. And they have great food, but more than that, they have better company. Now, an open house has this special type of warmth to it. Growing up, our house had a lot of guests in it when we had open houses, like family, friends, neighbors, new faces, you name it. And because of this, I got used to big crowds at a young age. And me and my family have a rule that open houses aren't just about the food. They're about the connections. It's the people coming in and out all day. It's people who laugh in the living room, talk in the kitchen, and somehow always end up back at the dessert table. But yes, our open chaotics were loud, it's chaotic, but honestly, it's perfect. This is my version of an open house. But at one open house, we invited friends and family of every faith, and I was super, super nervous. Not because of the fact that everyone had different perspectives, but because that if I said something wrong, or I had to limit what I had to say because I didn't want to offend anyone. So as I sat there on my very blue and comfy couch, quiet, because I was like, my hands were shaking, my feet sweaty, I was in a mess. And I was afraid that if I asked someone about a cultural question, that they might get offended. But as the guests started to trickle in and the food of biryani, butter chicken, samosas filled the air, and people started laughing, passing around dishes, something clicked. That click was between the bites and the laughter, teaching me that people were there not to judge, but to share, that a community is something you build around yourself with different perspectives and different people. Because that's what makes a community an actual community. So with this newfound step, I took this to my high school, Bellevue High School, and I brought together the Muslim Student Association, the Jewish Club, the Christian Club, and UNICEF for a shared fundraiser. We use food as our bridge of connecting everyone together. Food's universal, it's welcoming, it's easy. And this was our version of an open house. But it was beyond that. This fundraiser was for kids impacted by wars and showing that empathy across the stage itself, where differences fade under one light of humanity. And in those nights, we had a clear understanding and respect for each other's cultures, religions, and respective opinions. But what I remember most is that in those nights, we had cupcakes with little UNICEF flags on top, and those made that unforgettable. Now, not all open houses have to revolve around food, or the table that brings everyone together doesn't necessarily have to be the same as every other table. Sometimes, for me, it was the arts. It was the stage. And as I saw that, I thought, if food could bring people together, could arts do the same? That's when I created augmented reality theater, which brought a blend of Asian and American mix of dance, music, and storytelling. And during the performance, you could scan a QR code to see what the actor was thinking in real time. And for example, in one scene, the neighbors tried to make a South Asian dish, biryani, and the host said they loved it. And that's amazing with a huge smile on their face. But if you saw in the air a thought bubble, it said, "It doesn't quite taste like home, but I love they tried." This made the audience understand South Asian cultures in a deeper level and the respective cultures in the audience. And of course, we had to get together with food, obviously, as our bridge. Now, stepping a bit away from open houses and food, sometimes it's really hard to bring people together during hardships and hard times, or their emotions, in fact. In the United Kingdom, me and my theater troupe were performing at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And we had a great time. We had some great shows, and we got to learn about the cool history of the city. Until 19 of our 35 members got COVID. Yeah, that happened. And morale was low, and everyone was bummed up. And I couldn't use the same methods of open house techniques or food because that wasn't going to work. So that's when I had to turn to an essence of an open house, which was the laughter. I turned to lighthearted comedy and cheesy dad jokes like, "Why didn't the skeleton cross the busy road?" I don't know, because it had no guts to do it. But personally, what I loved is that I understood that an open house isn't the noise that's in it. It's the laughter that fills it. It's the laughter that I hear from the opposite side of the house. Even though I had no clue what the conversation was about, and it was none of my business, it still filled me with joy. So laughter is a medicine that unites people in very particular ways. Now, as you may know, I love combining two groups of people or technology and arts, but honestly, it's just something I do. I love combining two things that you normally wouldn't see together and combine them. For example, in Bellevue City Council, which is a youth council at my city, when COVID struck, we couldn't come together as much as we would have. And we thought a creative way of connecting with one another which I organized through hybrid style open houses, where some joined on Zoom and while others outdoors. Distance, but we still had a blast and laughed a lot over takeout from local cultural restaurants. Now, for me, community service has never been a checklist. It's been about that everyone has a seat at the table, regardless if that's at home, at school, in new colleges, or at City Hall. And the most important lesson I learned is that anyone and everyone can create their own version of an open house, whether it's in a Zoom classroom, a regular classroom, or a busy dining hall. Because food and open houses aren't just there. The food isn't for show, and the open house isn't a cold, meaningless handshake. It's about the aroma of sense of belonging, fostered by the warm food and a warm hug by the host. So, the next time you guys find yourself stuck at a flight delay at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, you're more than welcome to swing by my open house. Thank you.
Thank you, Farhaan, for your laughter, joy, and passion for community. Our final speaker is Robyn Boyland from the class of 2026. She will be presenting SIB, where affirmative action meets legacy admissions. Please give her a warm welcome.
Heaven is the scent of bacon swirling into your nose as you inhale yourself awake. Heaven is the sweetness of Auntie's Jergens lotion or the thickness of the southern summer air. You need not spiritual transcendence to pay this place a visit. Just the patience of a 10-hour car drive through the cornfields and the country. Every trip to my Gran and Poppy's house was like a pilgrimage back to my people, a place where a cousin lived across the street and another down the road, and another around the corner. This wasn't just my father's childhood home. This was a reverent land. And though we only came to Arkansas once a year, my connection to my grandparents' house ran deep. This was where my family story started. The Boyland family legacy. And I was proud of it. Just like the Werther's caramels I used to sneak from my granny's cabinet, things in moderation make you appreciate them more. Though every trip to Grand and Poppy's house was filled with heavenly reverence, coming back home to Nebraska brought me right back down to earth again. Growing up as the youngest of 5, my mom was constantly scolding me to stop aggravating my siblings like a record on repeat. My mom pushed poise and intelligence, reminding us that being Black in a white neighborhood meant that we'd have to work twice as hard to get half the respect. And my siblings, besides being my play-fighting partners, were also my built-in teachers. And they set the blueprint. And honestly, some pretty big shoes to fill. From being their school's first Black valedictorians, going on to MIT, Baylor, Harvard. When my Harvard College acceptance letter came, they were congratulatory, don't get me wrong, but I wasn't the first Boyland to come to Harvard. My dad even got in. So did 2 of my brothers. But it was my youngest brother who finally said yes and enrolled, making Boyland a legacy name. I still remember taking my Harvard College interview. I was crammed into a high school storage closet, pressing mute on the Zoom mic as the bell rang for passing period. During that interview was the first time that I found out that I was a legacy, and that helped. I wasn't quite sure what that meant, so in a follow-up meeting with the admissions office, I asked if being a legacy actually did help me get in. And their answer? Well, it didn't hurt. I still had no clue what this whole legacy thing even was, and honestly, packing my bags for Boston, that was the last thing into my mind. Coming onto campus, I was immediately immersed in such a unique social justice organizing space, like I'd never seen before, through organizations like the First Year Urban Program, the Phillips Brooks House Association, and eventually, the Institute of Politics. But not only was I immersed in the social justice scene, but somehow, despite being 1,000 miles away from home and at yet another PWI, I felt immersed in my community, my people. It was almost like I was back on my pilgrimage. I was with my people and for my people. So when October of freshman year came around and the affirmative action court case caught light, my stance was clear, and I protested for the rights of my people. After all, I wouldn't be here if not for affirmative action. But that clarity was soon muddied. Painted in direct opposition of affirmative action were legacy admissions. My ears perked. On campus, the word legacy carries a negative connotation. And just by the way that people talked about it, I knew that it was something I should not want to be. Saying that legacies didn't have to work as hard or that they got handouts. Meanwhile, I'd always tried to work twice as hard, just like my mom had taught me. Legacies seemed to be everything that I wasn't. With the words still ringing in my ear, I requested my admissions file. Surely that would clear everything up and prove I'd gotten in on my own accord. But lo and behold, written on the top in crimson red ink was one word: Sib, as in sibling, and my brother's name written almost as much as mine. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. It was clear. I am a legacy. But I also came to another realization. I was fighting against myself. I thought back to my Grand and Poppy's house, to all those summers appreciating where I came from and those who paved the way, but this just felt different. My brother and I shared the same name, the same home, the same family story. But I felt less deserving because he came first. And so I tried to distance myself from that label. But then came a turning point. Following the 2023 affirmative action ruling, my student org was approached with an ask to sign on to a statement in favor of ending legacy admissions. And what I thought was a symbol of standing with my community, I voted yes to ending legacy admissions. But what I thought was simple solidarity turned out to be not so simple. Citing an article, one of the members of my board said that ending legacy admissions would actually decrease the number of Black students on campus. That complicated things. Contrary to everything that I'd heard, both affirmative action and legacy admissions could benefit my community. I began to sit with that tension between pride and privilege, inheritance and intention. It echoed a conversation I had with my teaching fellow from African spirituality, Amado Kuneta. He said that we shouldn't just pick the best out of their communities, take them away, and never have them return. Because if I say I care about my people and where I come from, wouldn't I want to help those who come after me have equal, if not better, opportunities than I did? These questions completely changed the way I thought about success. Before that conversation, I'd felt embarrassed about coming back home for breaks, while my friends were out at international embassies and on Capitol Hill, as if being in Nebraska wasn't making the full use of my Harvard education. But I began to reconfigure those feelings into appreciation and acknowledgement of my privilege, but also how that privilege could be extended to others. It became less about making it out and more so about giving back. DC summers were traded for Nebraska summers. Public defense was in place of big law, and corporate ladders were traded for public grassroots organizing. My work in the Emerging Leaders Program, mentoring Black and brown high schoolers through social change projects, was the final nail in the coffin for my legacy resentment. Because the last thing I would want is for the little Black girl that I mentor to feel that she was less deserving or that she got a handout. Because here, though we might not all have cousins across the street and down the road and around the corner, the truth is, none of us could have done it alone. Things in moderation make you appreciate them more. And the more time I spent away from Nebraska, the more I became to cherish it. My parents' house began to grow the same heavenly reverence as my grandparents' house did. Waking up to the smell of bacon, wearing the same jergens that reminded me of my auntie, and even the Nebraska air feeling thick compared to Cambridge's. Now, this was heaven. A blessing passed from one generation to the next. And I was proud of it. But when heaven becomes just a bit longer than a summer's trip, now I think I'll finally be glad with living on as a legacy.
Thank you, Robyn, for that powerful speech of self-identity and home. And please give a big round of applause for all of our amazing speakers tonight. You all have put in so much work, and it was such an honor for us to work with all of you this semester. A big, big thank you to the IOP Student Executive Team, Director of Student Programs, Kathy Park, Director of Communications, Bridget O'Rourke, and IOP staff for working with us and our speakers this semester.
We also want to thank the late IOP Director, Siddiqui. While these times are incredibly hard, Moments like this allow us to remember how much he poured into students like ourselves and saw value and strength in each one of our narratives. Our showcase is only made possible by his impact and the support of all the incredible people at the IOP.
Thank you to the forum staff and students for your support and hosting this amazing event. And a big, big thank you to all of you for coming and listening to our students' stories. Thank you all again, and have a great night.
Thank you.